To protect their daughter, the parents confined her in a purification chamber of less than 10 square meters. Every day, greetings could only be exchanged through the glass. Even after delivering food, they had to leave quickly, with no physical contact allowed. It turned out their daughter had been suffering from an illness since childhood, requiring her to breathe air filtered by the purification chamber. They had thought she would have to stay there for her whole life. But an unexpected event occurred. On that day, the purification chamber inexplicably lit up. And what was even more terrifying was that they saw through the glass a rush of yellow gas suddenly emerging on the street, and all these gases were discharged from the city's sewage pipes. Anyone who accidentally inhaled them collapsed and could not get up. The father who was on the street witnessed everything, but as soon as he turned around, he saw a larger mass of gas rushing towards them. Everyone started to frantically flee for their lives. Matthew also hurried back home. Upon reaching home, he quickly pulled his wife away from the window. Fortunately, their daughter was protected by the purification chamber. After Matthew switched it to power-saving mode, he swiftly led his wife away from the danger, watching the poison gas rapidly surging upstairs. They had no choice but to run to higher floors. Finally reaching the top floor, they entered the home of an elderly couple. At that moment, the mother took out a walkie-talkie to inquire about their daughter's situation. Upon hearing that she was unharmed, they breathed a sigh of relief. Subsequently, they all gathered on the balcony, gazing at the terrifying scene below, their hearts filled with fear. But this was not the most frightening part. Soon after, Matthew climbed onto the roof, only to see the entire city engulfed in toxic fog, which had caused a citywide power outage. While their daughter was safe in the purification chamber, the battery wouldn't last through the night. Therefore, Matthew prepared to hold his breath and descend to change the battery for their daughter. He then descended the stairs, testing with his hand. The poison gas did not harm his skin. As long as it wasn't inhaled, it was relatively safe. However, the round trip to change the battery would take 10 minutes, a duration he couldn't endure. At that moment, Matthew suddenly remembered an elderly person downstairs, who had asthma and kept an oxygen cylinder at home. For the safety of his daughter, Matthew decided to take the risk and climb down following the water pipes. As he neared the range of the poison gas, Matthew took a deep breath, eventually reaching the floor where the elderly person lived, successfully breaking into the house through a window. Just as he was about to search, he noticed a person lying on the floor. Realizing it was the neighbor, who had stopped breathing. To make matters worse, the oxygen cylinder was not beside the person at that moment, the smoke-filled house becoming increasingly blurry. Finally, just as he was about to suffocate, he found the oxygen cylinder in a corner. Hastily, Matthew put on the oxygen mask, and at the last moment, he breathed in the oxygen. After fixing the oxygen cylinder in place, as he was about to leave, he suddenly heard a noise coming from the bedroom. It turned out to be a small dog. Strangely, the dog was not affected by the poison gas. Could it be that animals were immune to the gas? However, this assumption was quickly disproven by what he saw next, as the mother dog in the room had perished. Immediately after, Matthew returned home, successfully replacing the backup battery for his daughter, and bringing along some essential supplies. To gather more spare batteries, he ventured back downstairs, only to find the silent streets littered with corpses, their faces twisted in agony. Matthew instinctively tightened his grip on the oxygen mask. Later, he crawled under a car, collecting numerous spare batteries. Just as Matthew was preparing to leave, he suddenly heard a whistle. Curious, he walked towards the sound, and witnessed a large group passing through this area. It turned out they were soldiers sent to evacuate the surviving civilians. The captain noticed the rudimentary oxygen cylinder Matthew had, and replaced it with a new one. He then urged Matthew to catch up with the main group quickly, but Matthew explained that he couldn't leave because his family was still there. At that moment, Matthew requested another set of oxygen equipment from the captain, and explained his daughter's condition to him. Although the equipment was incredibly expensive, the captain eventually agreed. Upon returning, Matthew was horrified to discover that the level of poison gas was gradually rising. Staying there would mean certain death by poisoning. However, their daughter could only come out wearing a spacesuit, which was located in a laboratory in the city center. However, at that moment, the couple decided to take the risk and search for the spacesuit. Upon learning that the parents were heading to the city center, their daughter asked them to check on her friend, who was also ill like her and whose parents were not at home. Despite their daughter's request, they firmly refused, as everyone was in a precarious situation at that time. The daughter asked, "If my parents were not at home, Would you want me to be cared for by others?" In the end, the couple agreed. However, when they arrived at the boy's house, they found no trace of the boy. With their oxygen running low, they had to hurry to the laboratory and successfully found the spacesuit. Then, carrying the box, as they were about to leave, the laboratory unexpectedly exploded. Not long after, the couple regained consciousness, but Matthew suddenly felt difficulty in breathing. It turned out the oxygen hose had been burnt by the fire, leaving them with only one oxygen cylinder. The couple had to take turns using the oxygen masks. Carrying the heavy spacesuit, they proceeded with frequent stops, uncertain of how long it took them to reach the top floor. To make matters worse, the oxygen in the cylinder was running out rapidly. Continuing like this, both of them would perish here. Therefore, Matthew decided to let his wife go back first, promising to find a way back home later. His wife was extremely reluctant, well aware of the consequences of not having an oxygen cylinder. But the thought of their daughter at home made her suppress her tears and leave. In a bid to conserve oxygen, the wife sprinted through the streets. Yet the oxygen did not last until she reached home. With time running out, she swiftly removed the oxygen cylinder, held her breath, and struggled to drag the box towards the top floor. But to her astonishment, the scene before her left her in shock. Due to the earlier explosion, the box had been damaged, and the spacesuit had a large hole burnt through it. At that moment, the mother seemed to be plunged into despair. Meanwhile, Matthew was making his way towards home along the rooftop. But on the rooftop, he discovered a dead police officer. Following a trail of blood inside, he found various supplies and an oxygen cylinder. After observing that there was no one around, Matthew decided to shoulder the oxygen cylinder and head home. However, at that moment, a man in police uniform walked in and warned Matthew to put down the oxygen cylinder. Matthew saw through the ruse. The oxygen cylinder didn't belong to the man. It was stolen from the policeman he had just killed. Realizing he had been exposed, the man reached for his gun, prompting Matthew to swiftly don the mask and lunge it. Without the protection of an oxygen mask, the man succumbed to the poison gas. Matthew, getting back on his feet, hurried towards home. On the other side, the wife was having a conversation with her daughter when she suddenly noticed that the battery in the purification chamber was about to run out. With Matthew not at home, she felt at a loss. However, upon seeing that there was still 2% battery left, she made the daring decision to risk her life and go change the battery. Gazing at the deadly gas filling the hallway, the wife took a deep breath and decisively plunged into the toxic fumes. Seeing her mother coming down without an oxygen mask on, the daughter was filled with anxiety inside the purification chamber. However, the mother had no time to explain to her. Swiftly changing the purification chamber's battery, watching the purification chamber restart, the mother finally felt relieved. But she didn't rush to leave. Instead, she lay down in front of the window, gazing at her daughter, as if making a final farewell. Only after her daughter's urging did the mother, tears streaming down her face, depart. Shortly after, Matthew also rushed back. However, upon seeing the scene in front of him, he froze, slowly approaching in disbelief. Underneath the heavy oxygen mask were tears welling up, and as he looked at his wife lying in the hallway, Matthew fell into despair. Upon returning to the top floor, the daughter inquired about her mother's condition through the intercom. Matthew was unsure of how to respond, but when the words reached his lips, he couldn't bring himself to speak, as he was unwilling to accept the reality of his wife's passing. In the end, Matthew walked to the balcony and broke the news of the mother's death to the daughter. After hearing this, the daughter silently curled up in a corner, remaining silent for a long time, feeling like a burden. Not long after, a slight earthquake suddenly struck the house, causing the previously slowly rising poison gas to rapidly increase. They had to leave as soon as possible. Therefore, Matthew decided to venture out again in search of protective suits. Yet the elderly couple firmly refused. They believed that they were both advanced in age, with little time left, and that departing from this house would be the final destination. Subsequently, the two of them lay down together in bed, waiting silently with their loved ones for the arrival of death. On the other side, Matthew was fortunate to find protective suits and a truck. In order to rescue his daughter as quickly as possible, he found a motorcycle and hurried back. However, the visibility in the poison gas was extremely low. While speeding along, suddenly a boy appeared, and Matthew couldn't dodge in time. his body being flung away. When he regained consciousness, he had no idea how much time had passed. Matthew picked up the protective suit and quickly ran towards home, calling out to his daughter on the intercom as he walked. However, he received no response from his daughter. He slumped to the ground, unable to believe that his daughter had also left him. Just as he was at a loss, he noticed two figures in the distance. Matthew slowly got up and approached to take a closer look, and in the following scene, he felt as if he were dreaming. As his daughter was running towards him, it turned out that the purification chamber at his daughter's friend's house had long run out of power. So it was unexpectedly discovered that both the boy and his daughter were immune to the poison gas. But the next moment, he removed his own oxygen mask, and for the first time, a father kissed his daughter on the cheek. Lastly, in a humorous twist, when he woke up again, he found that he and his daughter had switched places. This time, it was himself lying in the purification chamber. From then on, the father was cared for by his daughter.